and also hopefully contribute to the conversation on mental health in the workplace. So to begin with, Shoikat and I are your hosts for today's session. I would also like to take this opportunity to recognize Shruti Pakrasi, who's been instrumental, in fact, to the forming of the OPRA research and toolkit. And of course, vMerge, our outreach partner, who are also participating in the session today. Before we get started, just a few things that we'd like to keep in mind. One, of course, is that if you have any questions, please do put them in the chat. We recommend that you tune in with your headphones because we'll also have a short video playing. And the session will be recorded. So our journey for today looks a bit like this. We'll first start with a brief introduction about X-Leap and our position in the organizational development landscape, right? Next, we will take everyone through key findings of the report, and there will be a panel discussion in addition to that. And this will be, again, followed by an official launch of the report by our chief guest. Speaking of which, our chief guest for today is Preeti Sridhar. She is CEO at Mariwala Health Initiative. Mariwala Health Initiative is a grant-making advocacy organization that works primarily on mental health in India. And Preeti's focus here, of course, is looking at project management, grant management, and other advocacy initiatives. She brings about 25 years of experience across profit and nonprofit. And she's passionate about women's rights, mental health, and child rights. And she aims to combine these experiences with her further interests in rights-based mental health work and support organizations and leaders focused on community-based interventions. So thank you so much for agreeing to do this and for being our chief guest, Preeti. Welcome to the session. We'd also like to briefly introduce our panelists. So of course, as you can see on the screen, we have Shoikat, who's the moderator for the discussion that will take place later on. He's managing partner at X-Leap. And quickly going down the list, of course, some very, very varied and very, accomplished professionals. So it would take a really long time. So we just have one line on each. Hamsaz, she's a practicing psychotherapist. She's CEO at the Seventh Fold, where she works with individuals, teams, and organizations in the areas of culture, performance, happiness, and HR capabilities. Mads, he is a Norwegian entrepreneur at vMerge, where they take pride in providing quality consulting services and use a global network to their clients' advantage. He is, interestingly, also an active member of a political movement in Norway, where mental health is a priority. We also have Bhavini. She's an experienced strategy consultant, and she's now leading the strategy and HR functions for Enrica Trades and Services and other companies under the JV Gokul Group, an Indian conglomerate with global footprints. We have Kshitija, who's an HR leader, an executive coach, an LGBT advocate, who's currently a senior vice president in HR at the Northern Trust Corporation, which is a F500 leader in investment solutions. We have Snigdha, who's an experienced HR professional with top-tier experience across consulting and businesses and is now leading OD work at X-Leap. And Samriddhi, who's an experienced talent and culture specialist, both in leading organizations as well as a consultant currently helping to anchor the cultural solutions portion at X-Leap. Of course, you've already heard about Preeti. And last but not least, we have Megha, who's an assistant professor of organizational behavior and human resources at the National Institute of Industrial Engineering. So welcome, everyone. With that, we move to our first session, which is a brief introduction about X-Leap by Samriddhi. So over to you, Samriddhi.
Thanks so much, Dev, and good evening, everyone. Just a quick confirmation if you can hear me fine.
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think op culture, when we talk about it, it's a huge umbrella term that we use, right? But making it more relevant in today's day and age, of course, the pandemic has transformed the way we operate as people and how organizations operate as well, right? And in fact, it's been a mammoth task for organizations to adapt in the last 2 to 3 years, right? Now, with the whole return to work, where organizations are primarily focusing on tweaking policies or focusing on employee engagement, Gen Z has actually further challenged how organizations operate. Okay, and if we look at the studies that have been done in the recent past comparing millennials to Gen Zs, it clearly shows that millennials focused on purpose-driven work, faster career growth, larger responsibilities early on, so on and so forth. Whereas Gen Zs are actually looking for work-life balance, flexibility, so that they can actually do something beyond work, right? And they prefer working with organizations that are diverse, inclusive, and empathetic, right? And that's why the organizations today need to be agile like never before, while being compassionate, which is the tough part, right? And this care and empathy that we're talking about somewhere needs to reflect in the organizational culture itself, rather than being offered as services or benefits or programs around counseling, mental health webinars, courses on happiness, so on and so forth, right? And that's where we as X-Leap come in, right? Where our primary focus is on designing human-centric solutions. And of course, our vision remains of building a kinder world altogether, right? And with that, I think I'll move to the next section where we'll hear Shruti's views on well-being and mental health at the workplace.
I think a lot of good work is already happening in the space of emotional well being and mental health in the workplace. The last couple of years have been psychologically very challenging for all of us. And it's incredible how organizations across the globe have been able to respond promptly to this crisis with solutions that have helped their employees cope better. In a very short span of time, we have moved from conversations around building a case for mental health to actual hands-on problem solving in this area. So all the interventions and conversations that have been going on are definitely helping at multiple layers and levels, especially when it comes to normalizing the idea of mental health. Now, if we have reached a point where we're thinking, what can we do differently? How is it that we can make a bigger, more meaningful impact? Then perhaps it's time for us to reflect on some data and ask a very basic question. The solutions that we are designing and deploying, are they anchored in some strategy? Are they aligned to the big picture? My observation is that there is a lot of emphasis on equipping and empowering the individual, which is of course a great practice. We would definitely want the employees to have the necessary knowledge, skills, and support. But if we look at it from the larger context, it's only one part of the equation that we are incessantly working on, which in other words can also be termed as a band-aid approach, which will definitely prevent us from getting sustainable outcomes from whatever initiatives we put in place. Therefore, perhaps the time has come for employers and organizations to truly reflect on their duty of care.
Okay, so you have just heard Shruti give.
I think a lot of good work is already happening.
Sorry about that. You've just heard Shruti give an explanation about why existing employee assistance programs and mental health interventions could be improved on. And now I'm going to turn it over to Shwekat to give you a brief on our findings from the OPRA report. So over to you, Shwekat.
Thanks a lot, Dave, and Samriddhi and Shruti. So I think this journey started about almost a year back when I had gone back to Kolkata, which is my hometown, and I met up with Shruti, who's a very dear childhood friend of mine, and we were chatting about what we were doing at work and otherwise. And as you remember, that is a time when COVID was still kind of really at its peak, and the good thing was that mental well-being had become, thankfully, a important topic to discuss and openly discuss, right? And but what I think I, as a non-mental health professional, if I may call myself that, what I was struggling to understand was that how do I know whether, I need mental health support or I don't need support? How am I doing? How do I even get to know that, right? And I was trying to obviously find an analogy with, the physical, well-being, right? And physical well-being, of course, it's so much easier to know whether we are doing well or not, because it's something that, you are dealt with from day one of your life. Mental well-being is not. And um, a- and I think the push that we were trying to make was that, okay, if everybody's talking about mental well-being being a big issue at this point of time, um, what are we doing about it? Are people aware? I mean, not just the people who are going through it, but even people who are around us. Are they aware? How much are we aware of the signs and what to do in case something some support is needed? And these were a lot of questions that were there in my mind. And I think Shruti, of course, being a professional from the space, she was trying to offer a few, kind of suggestions. But what we realized is that probably we really need to get down to data and understand from the community around us that what is the real situation, right? How can we try and assess and quantify maybe the degree of mental well-being issues that are there, also the kind of issues that might be there, and what potentially, more importantly, what potentially could be underlying factors. And that's really where we said that let's try and have a psychosocial analysis point of view perspective on this research, and also look at intersectionalities, right? And try and understand what could be underlying factors, and really learn this for ourselves, right? And we asked people a lot of questions around their individual selves, the organization, about environmental factors like COVID, war, etc., their own social identities, and so on and so forth. And as you see on the right, we try to understand their age, their gender, dependence, age, and so on and so forth. So we really try to understand all of that. Now, what we did with this, the questions that we had was, how do we help assess the psychological health of the workforce, right? um, is there a way to do that? Second, how do we design an end-to-end framework for the specific context that is there in a particular organization? Third, how do we understand the linkage between well-being, psychosocial risk, and business performance? Is that even possible, right? And adopt an evidence-based list of interventions, right? In case some organization decides to go ahead with this, that how do we enable them to take interventions which are based on certain evidences which are relevant for their context? So with that, we really started off with the objectives. We reached out, and as you can imagine that getting responses on this kind of a survey is extremely difficult, right? This is not something that people open up to easily. And this was a really long survey. We had more than 100 questions because it was really deep and we really wanted to understand in depth. And I think the call that Shruti and I took was not to sacrifice the number of questions to get more respondents, but really to go on depth. And we got about 70 odd responses from various parts of the world. We did not ask for any personal information like names or country and so on and so forth. We know, of course, from people who have responded that there have been people from across the world and all kinds of people. But this is a brief picture of the demographics of this survey that you can see. Almost an equal split between men and women, not exactly, but almost there. Um, Almost 50% married, 50% not. Work arrangements, as you can imagine, again, a whole lot of arrangements that we see there, and different kinds of educational qualifications, right? Of course, a large number of them are postgraduates, as you can see, and therefore that is something that we need to keep in mind, that is the skew that will be there in this survey results. And the survey was done through LinkedIn because that was again the time of COVID, and that was the only way we could really go out and do this, right? Now, what I would like to do next is quickly share a few bits of insights, key insights that I think came out from this survey, and then really open up to the panel and hear their perspectives on this or any of their experiences, right? So the first bit that really shook me, and I think a lot of us, is that 96% of the respondents reported at least early symptoms associated with mental health issues, of which, by the way, around 46% reported severe symptoms. And these symptoms are, as you can see on the right, these are some of the symptoms that we were checking for, right? Going ahead, we looked at some of the top factors. Now, these were some of the individual factors or non-organizational factors, right? We saw that about 30% said that we are not able to cope well. About almost 20% said they are experiencing some significant life event at this point of time. And around 35% said they did not have good family support, which means staying isolated at home, unable to depend on family when feeling sad, and so on and so forth, right? Now we move to the organizational factors. And we look at, kind of three things, right? Actually, there are multiple factors here. 40% feel that their jobs are monotonous and lacking innovation. 30% feel insecure about losing their jobs. 50% feel unfairly burdened within the team. And I'll draw on a few more insights, and hopefully, a picture will start to emerge, right? If you go ahead, 35% feel that they do not have adequate support from managers. 20% reported bullying of some sort. 50% said off-hour communications was very common. Okay. Other org factors, 20% said they do not want to walk the extra mile as far as work is concerned. 40% said they don't have access to good mental health support. And this at the peak of that conversation that was going on around mental health, and every organization was coming up and saying how well they're doing on trying to kind of deal with this or help their employees with. 50% were saying that they have a work-life balance issue, right? And these are all self-reported numbers, anonymous in a way, right? So these were some of the numbers. Now, what we try to do is also try to go deeper into these numbers, right? And Dave, if you could just go ahead, yeah. So what we tried to do is really break this up into two categories of those who were showing intense symptoms and those who were showing milder symptoms, right? And we tried and checked whether there were any other demographic factors which was influencing this in a way, right? So what we found was a bit surprising. Some of it may be intuitive, some of it may be counterintuitive. When we took a gender lens, and of course we just took men and women in this survey, right? Because of the sample size, I think there wasn't much more possible. The number one thing that we looked at was financial and job security. We saw that financial security was a bigger factor for women, whereas job security was more significant for men, right? As far as work environment is concerned, there is a starker difference for women versus men, which means that work environment played a larger role in the women who responded to the survey in either feeling intense, with the symptoms, or feeling lesser intense with the symptoms. Whereas job monotony was a more important factor for men, right? And going forward, we looked at marital status, and I'm of course just picking up a few snapshots from this report. For example, job security, we mentioned. While we saw that it was more important or a differentiator for men, here we are also seeing that it is more important for married people than for single people, right? Job monotony now is starker for single than for married, right? And well-being support, performance assessment, growth opportunities, these were becoming more important for single folks who are single rather than married. Now, what we are trying to do with these insights is not to say that this is representative of the population, right? We understand that the population is much wider, much more diverse than what our sample is. What we are trying to say is that even in a small sample, and we are seeing that there are so many underlying factors, which means that organizations, we believe, need to understand that it's not a straitjacket. It's not that job or security is something which is common for everybody, but it may be playing out very differently for two sets of people in the organization. Similarly, for how jobs are designed, like job monotony, right? Now, if are we giving jobs which are monotonous in nature to, let's say, single people, which means let's assume younger people, right? That may be a cause for worry, actually, right? And this, we heard what Samriti said in the beginning, that Gen Z are actually looking for something very different now, right? And maybe these are all coming together. So the point that we are trying to make here is that, one is that it seems that mental health is not great for a lot of us. Of course, within that, there are people who are doing better and those who are not doing as well. there are a lot of factors, both personal as well as organizational, which could be contributing to all of this. It could be a combination of all of this. And it's important, we believe, that organizations dig deeper and find out how is it actually playing out in their own organizations, right? So with this, I'll take a pause and hear really from people who are experts in this field. They've had already introduced us to the panel, and it's a extremely rich panel. And I would maybe go around the table a bit and maybe start with Megha, right? Megha, as you heard, is a professor of OB. She's a PhD in OB and HR. She is working at Niki right now. And Megha, it would be wonderful to get your views on this.
Sure. Thank you so much, Shekhar. And hello, everyone. Good evening. It's wonderful to be here, and compliments to X-Leap for doing this kind of important work, because I think in the pandemic, the two things that have really emerged very critical are well-being of employees and, of course, diversity and inclusion, how to make workspaces more inclusive. And I think they both go really hand in hand as well. So I was also going through what you said, your report, and clearly, I think what emerges as something which is very critical for organizations today is to be able to create a culture where people can speak up openly. See, we may have the best policies, best infrastructure and designs, and best AI and best processes possible. But if we don't have a mechanism in the organization where people feel comfortable to voice their concerns, according to me, nothing else matters more. So creating a system where people are able to say what they have to openly, where people are trained to be sensitive enough in terms of how to deal with such kind of information. So for example, if a subordinate goes up to his or her or their boss and talks about feeling a sense of discomfort or anxiety or panic attacks, how is that person dealing with this particular employee becomes very important. An organization has a very critical role in sensitizing its employees in order to deal with such situations. Similarly, there was this statistic in your report that bullying is a big reason for people to feel a sense of anxiety, or it impacts their mental well-being. So is the top leadership conscientious of the fact that there is zero tolerance for discrimination, for bullying, and such activities in the organization? That becomes very important. And I think one thing which will play a very, very critical role is to understand whether the entire mechanism, the entire ecosystem of employees, managers, and the policies and the processes which are created, are they allowing everybody to be an inclusive part of the organization in the true sense of the word, right? And for that, it has to start with inclusion, and mental health and well-being is a very, very important component of that.
Thank you so much, Megha. I think that's a wonderful perspective on how it starts with inclusion and it's about culture, right? Why don't we move to also hearing for somebody in the industry, and maybe I'll move to Bhavani. And she's been, with the corporates for a very long time, a consultant, and now, leading strategy and HR. So Bhavani, could you share your thoughts on this?
Sure. Thanks, Ankat. Good evening, everyone. It's been quite interesting to understand what X-Leap has actually come up with respect to their survey. Not something unexpected, something that we all have looked at in this pandemic time. And fortunately, unfortunately, when we went through the pandemic time, we obviously had the hybrid model, work from home, we had lockdowns. What I came up with and what I felt that benefited companies, various companies under JV Gokul Group, were these, daily meets, daily calls. We had it in like a morning, afternoon, evening session, a 5-minute stand-up call where you're not talking anything of work, right? You're just having a stand-up quick session, quick understanding with people on a daily basis. That really helped that kind of bonding to take place during the lockdown for sure. Because, and then we had these certain nice yoga sessions and things that we could actually make fun of one another and, get that little interaction and getting along with making teams, so they were talking to one another because there were teams involved. And a very important concept which I felt that the employees of mine understood, and it helped us, is to understand what distraction and disruption was while we were working from home. So just simply any distraction that takes place, while you're working, it postpones your thought for almost 23 minutes. This is not me, Bhavani, saying it. This is just generally a research which defines that any distraction, like I'm looking right now and probably I see my mug is untidy with full of, this person has not taken it. But while I'm working, if I'm thinking of that postpones my thought and my work for 23 minutes. So we explain this concept in a very literal sense to people, and people do realize it. And with respect to disruption, because we are yet working in a hybrid model, when you know that you are working, you do not require that little child of yours coming in or any other kind of issues. Especially, I understand even again in terms of gender, it always works. However, whatever that we can talk about with respect to women and stuff and everything, we do know that women do play a stronger role even in the house. So in that context, again, you have to get your people involved. Let them know this is my disruption that comes in. When you are coming in, I'm interrupted with my work and I'm doing so. So those kind of sessions we had with family. So all this improved not only culture with respect to the organization, and as rightly put by Megha, I think culture plays a very important role, and it starts with like shared goals, mission, vision, values. We define our values like a hard law, HARD, LAW, but H standing for honesty, accountable, reliable, and things starting with that. But I think all of it basically is a strong base that one holds with respect to culture. And that's how the mental well-being of employees is then taken care of. Yeah. Anything else that you would like me to add?
No, great. I think this is great, because I think I was also looking at a lot of things that both of you said are very similar about, creating an inclusive culture in a way that you allow people to speak up and bond at a personal level. Also, I think what you added on is that, let disruptions be normalized, right? And let people know about that. Let's just create that space. I think that's a very, important takeaway, right? If I move on, right, and I'll maybe move on to Hamsa's, right? Now, Hamsa's, you're a professional, psychologist. You have been dealing with many organizations, many people, counseling them. Now, a lot of people go through something which is a lot more serious as well, right? And corporates are, also, people exist within corporates as well. And, of course, there are many people outside corporates who are, also challenged. So how do you react to, at least, some of the data that you saw? You have done your own research. And so what's your take on this?
Thanks, Sekat. Firstly, I want to say big congratulations for this initiative. I strongly believe that what we measure gets improved. And so if we are really looking at improving well-being, then we need to start measuring it to really be able to work on it and improve it. So this is a great initiative. What in my experience, and also as you know that my organization also conducts a well-being survey, what I've seen in this is that when the pandemic first broke out, there was a huge surge that we saw when it came to anxiety, depression, insomnia. In fact, that was quite high as well, burnout, stress. So a lot of these, and I'm sure psychotherapists and people in this industry will tell you that suddenly they were getting a surge of calls to deal with and surge of sessions to actually handle. Thankfully now, as we're getting back into, if I can use the word normal, getting back into a normal state, these are slightly reducing in terms of the number of employees that are sort of reporting anxiety, depression, even insomnia. This is showing a downward trend. However, what continues to remain probably even higher than what it was when the pandemic broke out was stress. That is still, and I think your report very clearly highlights that as well. It is continuing to remain high. One of the reasons is, and I believe that organizations, while we talked about culture of open and being able to communicate, etc., one other thing very important from a culture perspective is also about trust. And a lot of organizations and a lot of employees have kind of had to deal with over monitoring because of the work from home, or even the hybrid situation where you're not in front of them, and so the supervisors are over monitoring. Meetings are kept at the end of the day or really early morning, just to ensure that the employee is working all the time. And that has brought in, so I feel that now organizations really need to sort of work on this part, the stress, the burnout, the long hours that employees are working on. It's taking a toll on their overall health, whether physical or mental. And I think that part, the trust part of the culture, is also very, very important. Of course, I want to talk a lot more about the gender bit, the different cuts you've talked about, but I think if you have time, we can probably talk about those areas.
No, wonderful, Hamsaz. I think it's important to note, like you said, that stress is actually increasing, right? And that could be because of the work practices that we are adopting at this point of time. And I can tell you for sure that the number of conversations that I've had with just friends, colleagues, etc., where people are saying that we are probably ending up more time, or spending more time on meetings and calls rather than actually doing something. Right.
Yeah.
That has significantly.
And that is where even
increased.
your sorry, just to jump in, that is where your numbers of showing unfairly burdened with work, right? That is like almost 50-60%, if I'm mistaken.
Potentially, yeah.
Because that is how the pressure is just sort of building on with these calls and sort of mistrust issues.
Absolutely.
So just to add on to that, Saikat, there is this app that we use Microsoft 365, which mostly everybody probably do. You have that Microsoft daily briefing, which tells you that what time of the day are you actually using your emails. And that's something that we bring in with the people when we've had our trainings. We've told them that, look at it of when you are actually emailing. Like nobody is wanting to email and read an email at 11 in the night. It's no point. So those things have been, because certain employees behave in certain way. They just can't change their behavior. Probably their late night, they prefer the late night working, but don't email, do it the next day. So these things are informed. And when it comes from the management, when it is informed, I think that little, they take care of it. They be cautious of not to do so. And that then doesn't burden the other employees, peer pressure doesn't happen. So something that management can put in their efforts to do so.
I think very well put, right? I think small things like this, frankly, I've been guilty of this, and my team has pointed it out that, don't send emails at night, right? Because then everybody will have a tendency to kind of look at it at that point and revert, right? There's no need, you can schedule it for the morning. And I've learned how to do it, hopefully. Maybe we'll just shift the lens and maybe also go across the world and go to Norway and hear from Mads, who's played a very different role in the space of mental well-being, and he's an entrepreneur now. Mads, does this sound familiar, or is this a very different world for you?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. No, it's all familiar, but the culture is very, very different. So we have the same issues, but different reasons for the issues. So for the Nordic market, we have challenges related to the same topics. We have, let's say, we have a lot of different reasons for issues we're having, like time management issues, the high-paced environment, which is a huge topic here. So it's getting more and more into the light, really, as I can say the stigma for mental health challenges are slowly decreasing in Scandinavia. And for me, talking about Norway, the challenges are increasing simultaneously. As it is becoming more acceptable to seek professional assistance, the numbers are also increasing, as they would do. But there is different environments in the working spaces here as well. Typically male-dominated industries, the stigma is higher. But I believe they should all have the same parachute to help them from falling, you know, and I believe that OPRA is a project that can be that parachute. And you know, some of the arrangements in place in Norway is that some companies have a psychologist available for their employees through insurance. You might get 8 sessions a year, 45 minutes each session, a program like that. But it's not pushed on you, so you have to take the initiative to figure out these things yourself. And well, there are also some pilot studies, low-key projects, in terms of questionnaires, forms that you voluntarily fill out, and then the working space gets kind of an oversight of how the mental health is developing in the workplace. But you know, there's no toolkit, there's no concrete measurements to be taken, and I believe we can get this into the market here and actually make a huge difference. And we at VMerge are very proud to be associated with X-Leap and the OPRA project. So yeah, with that, I'll just say thank you for developing a fantastic project, and I'm looking forward to continuing on this. And yeah, let me also add, I have, on a personal note, I'm politically active, as Shokot said, and I've been developing a party. We had our first government election last year, where we were awarded the best political program for mental health by the Norwegian Mental Health Association. So yeah, I'm very committed to this project, and I feel it can be a very good bridge between cultures, and we can make a change.
Awesome. I'm sure, Mark, you're getting a lot of silent applause here. Everybody's muted, so you can't hear it. But you know, I'm sure everybody's very happy about that. But thanks a lot. And Cliff has actually, yeah, Clifton has actually got a applause there for you. No, but you're right about you know, the fact that, you know, cultures are different, but I think the challenges are fairly common, and the barrier to seeking help still, you know, kind of remains, right? With this, maybe I'll also now hand it over to Preeti. And Preeti, as you know, is the chief guest for today, and she is the CEO of Mariwala Health Initiative. And you know, Preeti, you do a lot of work in mental health across the country, and especially with, you know, a lot of disadvantaged societies as well, and communities as well. How do you look at, you know, all of this, and what's your perspective?
Thanks, Eckert. Before I start, I'll say that my experience in the development sector has been only in the last 7 years. Prior to that, 18 years, I've been in the ratings and banking and financial services. So I'm trying to see how much balance of terminology should I use between the two worlds. I was also checking with Eckert, what should I speak about? And he said, how great do you think, or what is the extent of the problem that we're talking about? So in India, in 2015, there was a survey done that said 150 million people live with mental health issues. And this was a 13-state survey. And I would say that's a demand side. And these 150 million people are employed somewhere or the other. So we are talking about a large, and WHO says that 1 in 4 of us will experience mental health issues once in a lifetime. So we are people who will experience it. We are people who are sitting within the corporate sector and the employment market today. So it's a audience that you cannot ignore. You cannot ignore in terms of your hiring, and you cannot ignore in terms of retaining as talent pool within organizations. Most of the conversations that I've heard today within this panel and also outside tends to talk about mental health, usually in the depression, anxiety category. Depression is actually an emotion for sadness. Anxiety is an emotion for anxiousness. And we seem to diagnose these psychiatric disorders and replace it with emotions. It's okay to have sadness. It's okay to have anxiousness, right? To be anxious about anything. So Conversations in the workplace also tend to be limited to depression and anxiety. Conversations in workplace today talk about linking it to physical health, saying there's a set of symptoms, there's a particular kind of treatment, which could be medication, which could be counseling or talk therapy. And if you do this, which is a linear way of functioning, you will arrive at cure, right? And because of this, I would say, biomedical approach to thinking, what organizations currently provide are psychiatrists, counselors, mindfulness support. Now, while these are good to have, what's missing from the conversations of what we need to start reframing in our thing is start talking about change in workplace environment, workplace processes, which are again biomedical driven, but also start talking about how psychological and social society impacts mental well-being. It gets reflected in our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and what it means to have a psychosocial model of looking at mental health is to talk about experiences we have, to talk about contexts we live in, and our own lives. So as Mads was saying, probably the reasons for mental health are different. But the stigma around mental health is more. Mads was also talking about stigma for men to talk about their mental health. It's true in Indian society also because it comes from patriarchy, right? And we did a research on entrepreneurial well-being in 2019, and we realized that one of the fears they had was fear of failure because they link their business failure to their own personal failure. And what does it mean for mental health or mental well-being of an individual who thinks my work reflects who I am? So I think there is a need to change those conversations. And I think we need to also talk about mental health in the lens of rights. What are the rights of people who are coming into your organization? And talk about these rights in the context of disability. Because there's a lot of literature available. In fact, Rights of Persons with Disability Act, which is applicable in India, clearly says that psychosocial disability is part of disability. So we need to talk about disability rights. And when we talk about disability rights, I think there is a need to start talking about reasonable accommodations in workplaces. Reasonable accommodation means what is necessary and appropriate modification or adjustment that employers may need to provide so that employees are able to perform to their full potential. So I think, that's a bridge that workplaces need to start looking at. And I think Megha right at the beginning had said about diversity and inclusion policy, which I think Bhavani and others have also articulated in that manner. So I think we need to include within our diversity and inclusion the disability rights and the disability policies, and disability policies need to include mental health.
Thank you so much, Riti. I think that was a lot of learning. I think in that very short period, I think even for us as we reflect on a very small organization, but I think there's a lot that I think pick up from what you said, actually. So thank you. Maybe what I'll do is I think this is enriching, and I have a feeling that this is just getting started. This conversation, and there's a lot more that can happen. Obviously, we kind of scheduled this to be an 1 hour session because typically we all have very busy days, like we just discussed, and even taking an hour out usually is a real challenge for a lot of people, right? Now, just in that spirit, I think what we want to have a bit of an open session at the end, right at the end, so that maybe there are others who are listening in and you have comments and questions. Please feel free to start sending them in. In the meanwhile, what I'll do is I'll maybe request Samriti to maybe just conclude this panel discussion with your thoughts, and then we'll kind of move on to the next bit.
So I think so very, very relevant points, a lot of learning, right? And this is a journey where every day I think we hear of these conversations and there's something new that kind of rings a bell, right? certain things, certain issues that are really, really real, right? Burnout, for instance, stress, a couple of you spoke about it, right? It's very real. The fact that, different genders are experiencing different, issues at the workplace and the way they are dealt with it, right? All of those are very, very real. And for me, and my personal view is that if we can actually create that psychological safety at the workplace, right? Just have an open culture where people can speak up, or there are enough and more support groups, right? And some people are doing it in the form of allies, some people are doing it as ERGs, so on and so forth, and organizations are doing that, right? That might be a good start, right? Inclusive culture also, when we talk about, there are so many different factors, right? Just starting off with acknowledging what are the issues is, in my view, a first step, and an easier one as well. And I think Bhavani also spoke about some very, very practical solutions, right? So a lot of companies now that we see are coming up with certain rules, right? So meeting etiquettes, for example, or email etiquette, where beyond a certain point, no one can send out emails. And that's coming as a rule from the leadership. Very, very easy to do, but has a huge impact on culture and, of course, the well-being of our employees as well. Right. So a lot of practical things, but this is just a start. And thank you, everyone, for sharing your views. Yeah, as I said, it's just a start. Back to you, Shweta.
No, thank you so much, Samriti, for kind of summarizing that. Like I said, I'm sure this conversation can go on a lot longer. What we'll try and do very quickly in the next bit is talk about the approach that we are wanting to suggest to corporates, that this is how you could think about this issue, right? I think one of the and Dave, you can probably pull up the deck in the meanwhile. I think the one thing that has been clear to me, and I think it's been clear with this conversation as well, is that it is a complex subject. It is not, there is no one answer to things. There is no one way to look at all of this. It's a fairly complex subject. There are a lot of socio-cultural aspects that are at the root of a lot of issues. There are current environmental issues. There are also job design, organizational issues that combine together to create these challenges. And I think as someone who doesn't come from this background, what I realize that it can actually get so complex that it can actually be paralyzing to act on it, because you don't know where to start. Even if I do something, then I feel, okay, is it too less, too little to do something? And I think that's really where we want to take this a little ahead and hopefully help organizations to think about it differently. So we've obviously seen a lot of organizations doing a lot of things, and I'm sure very, very genuinely. But what we would like to do is for organizations to think around, what are your objectives around mental health, right? I mean, have a thought around what is it that we think about it, right? If you have an objective around mental health, then are you getting the results you want? And if not, then why? Is there a structure? Is there a template? Is a framework to get those answers? And finally, why are people in your workflows not using resources and EAPs made available to them? Like a lot of you spoke, these services, again, not everybody requires these services, but even people who require these services are not always really, picking up these services, right? And I've heard CXOs, who are saying, okay, you know what, my EAP adoption rate is, less than 1%. So I think my people are doing well. Now, I'm not sure if that is the right interpretation that we should take away from that number, right? Because we know that there is, I mean, all the statistics that we mentioned, or what Priti mentioned, what everybody else mentioned, that actually the prevalence of issues is much wider than that, right? In any community that we look at. So moving ahead, what we are suggesting and the approach that we are really talking about is, how do we look at the OPRA approach? Is first of all, help to quantify the potential risk to your employees and to your business. So really trying to reframe this for organizations and looking at it from a risk perspective, that what's the risk to your employees and thereby to you as an organization. Of course, the key point being that if a large portion of the employee base are not feeling well, it is bound to impact organization performance at some level, right? So let's look at it from that risk perspective. Then enhance the employee's value proposition, right? How can they feel better and more comfortable, in this organization? And finally, drive a change agenda. And this change agenda is not just about some people who are really struggling at this point of time taking up a few services, but like a lot of you mentioned, it's about the culture. It's about, are we building a more trusting culture? Are we building it more inclusive? It is all pervasive. In fact, we had done some work on diversity, equity, inclusion a while back, and I think one of the change in mindsets that we have undergone is that diversity, equity, and inclusion is not about certain groups of people out there, not for women, not for disabled groups, and so on and so forth. Diversity, equity, inclusion, in my opinion, or in a lot of people's opinion, is actually for everybody, because we are all diverse in some way or the other. And is the organization, is the community that we are in, is it accepting of that and allowing us to flourish with whoever we are, right? So how we want to operationalize this is, Deep, if you could just move. Yeah, thanks. So what we have done is that we have created a tool which allows an organization to run a survey with their employees, anonymous, of course, through which we are able to get really deep cuts in terms of, what are the issues, which parts of the organizations are there, different kinds of issues, what could be potential underlying factors, are there, like we said, are there differences by personas, and so on and so forth. So giving that organization a much deeper view of where you are in terms of overall mental well-being, right? And pinpointing maybe to a certain extent the kind of issues that could be there and that which need to be addressed, right? Now, I think what we also want to be very clear about it, that just a survey is not going to get us all the answers. It has to be followed with conversations, FGDs, interviews, etc., of course, on a sample basis, but that will provide clues to the causation, because the survey will not be able to provide real causation, kind of linkages, but maybe those conversations would, and we'll know what kind of questions to ask. But once organizations have this, then it becomes a lot easier for us to then help an organization to think a little more in a structured way about mental well-being, right? And not just looking at it from an initiative perspective, but looking at it from a culture shift perspective. Is any employee down the line who has just joined the organization able to go up to the manager and talk about an issue? Is that being made possible? Is that an intent for the organization? If these kind of things are identified and sorted out, we believe that overall the stress in the system is likely to come down. A lot of the programs that we have done during COVID, we realized that, I think, so many of you were mentioning that long calls were going on, right? A lot of people were just not aware that this was the impact it was having on their teammates. But the moment you are asked to step back and just think about it, hear your colleagues, hear your team members talk about it, they realize that, okay, this is the kind of impact it's happening on them. And then a lot of people actually, are more amenable to change their patterns in a way, right? So this helps to drive some strategic, initiatives or, culture shift in the organization. And then, of course, there will be situations where there will be additional support required. And there, what we are doing is we're partnering with a whole lot of experts, many of them who are on the call today, and really working with them to provide those specific services that an organization might need, right? Shilpa, I think she's not there today, but she's basically a leadership coach, psychotherapist. She works with the leadership, and so many times I've been with her, and we have realized that a lot of the stress that lies within senior leadership teams can be broken through a good facilitation, good session that is being facilitated, and that automatically then percolates down the organization, right? Hamsas, we all heard and met right now. Rashmi, I'm guessing she might be on the call. She's one of the most senior, most certified yoga instructors who really think about yoga not from a exercise perspective, but as a holistic lifestyle, the way yoga is meant to be, right? And so we want to be able to bring these to organizations and say that this is where you really can take this to action? How do you now translate this into action and start seeing changes and then keep measuring? I think a lot of us have said that if we don't measure, we can't, really know where we are going. So that is really what we, are at, what we are trying to do with OPRA. And, very, very glad about this session. And at this point, what I'll really love to do, I mean, it's probably just a fancy, but it'll be great if we can, kind of officially launch this to the public. And I would invite Preeti to, do the honors and probably share a few comments. We don't have a real scissor to cut the ribbon, but really handing it over to you to, just share your thoughts a little bit on not just OPRA, but your like anything that you want us, all of us, to take back.
Right. Thanks, Saket. I think very happy that this report is coming out and that you are encouraging more conversations on workplace mental health. The only, I think, my request to people who want to use a product like this is to say that let's look beyond productivity of employees. Let's look beyond return on investment for workplace mental health and look at it from a lens of disability, look at it from a lens of rights, which means that are we ensuring that everyone has an equal and fair chance to be part of our organizations? And are they able to access their rights within the organizations and perform to their full potential? But once again, congrats, Saikat and the X-Leap team for coming out with such a product and encouraging more conversations in this much needed space.
No, thank you so much, Preeti. And I will encourage any one of you who are interested in this subject to really go to, Preeti and Maniwala Health Initiative's website. I think there is tremendous amount of research and work that, they do, and it is, up there. It's really quite incredible, I think. And it's largely, Preeti, it's largely open source, right? I mean, it's open to public, right?
All of it is open to public.
Right, which is amazing. So thank you so much for everybody being here. What we would love to do is to also, as we are ending it, actually open it up and hear your views, right? I think there's been a lot of people, you have heard a lot of views, opinions. It will be fantastic to just, come in with your thoughts. You can put in questions on chat, or you can just open up your mic and speak. Will be absolutely fantastic to hear your thoughts, and all of us are there to kind of respond. And I don't think anybody's an expert. We all are in the same journey. We'll all try our best to respond to each other, right? So
hey, Shaikat, Guha here.
Hey, Guha.
One of the interesting things that has happened after we have opened up is this slew of trainings, right, that have popped up on people's calendars from our HR department, which essentially is a good thing. I mean, it's talking about topics like, living with elderly people, for one, living in multi-generational homes and things like that. Topics we probably wouldn't have even remotely thought about a couple of years ago, right? In terms of actually having an external speaker and come and talk about it. But the flip side to that is, it's kind of scripted, right? In the sense that there are these 10 things that top 10 things that organizations are discussing today. So it's the same 10 topics that you will see most of the organizations kind of get an external coach to come and talk about, rather than just getting a pulse of, okay, what is really bothering your organization right now that everybody is back in the building. Instead of that, it almost feels like, because I talked to a couple of other industry players, and they're also like, yeah, it's the same topics here as well. So it in certain cases, I think it's kind of becoming a script that, here are the 10 topics that we need to address with regards to mental health, and not really going and talking to people in terms of what's going on in the building, and then let's try and cater to that first, rather than just go run off on a tangent.
No, I think I'm sure there will be a lot of people wanting to respond to that. Anybody who wants to respond upfront or add on or build on that, or facing similar issues as well? Preeti, Megha, anybody?
I could go.
Yeah, sure.
Guha, I come from business background and then moved from HR. So I would say probably HR is doing what it thinks needs to be done in terms of equipping with knowledge. But it would be like, I would say you're a business person, you have managed teams for many years, much more than the HR, and you know your teams better. So are you able to build a connect with your team? And if you have, I would say use these resources in case there's a specific person. So for example, if you know of a team member who's feeling stressed and is having a conversation with you and saying, I don't know how to live with elderly parents, then it's a resource that you could use. And I would say adopt it to your style, your lived realities. Do you want to share your own experiences about it? But clearly, if you're a 500-member team, really nobody can give you customized responses. What they will give you are broad guidelines, and I would say adopt it like guidelines, but make it your own by including your own experiences into it.
True. Yeah. Thank you so much, Preeti. Yeah, completely agree with that.
Saika, just to add one more point, that I do also feel, having said that there needs to be a lot of education even amongst HR professionals about mental health and well-being, because sometimes there are a lot of myths, a lot of misinformation about what is really mental health and how it impacts an individual and how it doesn't impact an individual. These are things that probably need to be more talked about even to the HR folks and educate them a little bit more, so that because otherwise they're just going to give you off-the-shelf programs, because they need to do something in this area, and so it becomes easier that way.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. Clifton, you have your hands up.
Yes, thank you, G. Saika. It's a fantastic conversation. I'm so happy to be part of it. Actually, I didn't know what to expect, but thank you to all of you. It's very inspiring. And there are a lot of thoughts coming up into my mind. So there are a lot of impulses, which I happily take away with me. I just want to share very few. I come from I have an impact background project.
I'm not sure if it's just me, but is everybody else facing a bit of an audio disturbance as well? Yeah. Clifton, sorry,
so am I breaking?
Now you're fine. Yeah, you were, but now you're fine. Yes.
Okay.
Sorry.
I make it short. So I understand so far that OPRA is more or less a diagnostic tool as of now. That is my understanding. But of course, very important is how do we create change? I've seen that on a slide of yours, Saika. And personally, I see two sides of the medal. So this is prevention and curation. So, prevent things to worsen with individuals or deal with existing issues. And I think both is absolutely relevant for corporates, for organizations. But then I also ask me, so who is driving in an organization, who is driving a change? So, and what I did not hear so far, and that is my main contribution, why don't we look at leaders, at the management? What is their role? Do they perpetuate a kind of troubling situation, or how can they improve things? And my wife, she's actually also she's in the HR department of a bigger corporate in Munich. They are 1,000 employees, and she's currently redesigning a leadership development program. So that would be something where I would be happy to have also a kind of cause and conversation in that kind of program regarding the issues we are talking about today. So that is just some thoughts I wanted to share with you from the practical view. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, Clifton. I think it's really relevant, and I'll tell you why. Because I think it's our firm belief that this has to be led from the top. It has to be an agenda driven from the top. But like a lot of people are saying, that there is also a necessity for some amount of education and awareness about this issue. Unfortunately, for a lot of us who are in the business world, we have grown about not ever talking about mental health. And then when we are leaders, we are suddenly expected to be, driving this conversation and driving this agenda through the organization. We are not equipped. Like, I know I am not equipped to do this, right? And I think the first thing that, like you said, if for example, there's a leadership conclave happening or a workshop happening, session happening, I think these are actually great places to, begin these conversations, right? And these are conversations. It cannot be like, somebody coming and saying something and it's not like 10 things to do and move out. These are conversations. So I think Clifton, very happy to, also talk about this offline and see how to, kind of take these to organizations and help to start it from the leadership level. I think that accountability has to be, at the top. Every organization is different and they will figure out probably who's that. But yes, our approach is definitely talking about diagnosis, but then moving into change. We didn't spend too much time, again, given the time constraints that we have, but happy to take that offline as to how we are really planning about how to drive the change that is most likely to be there. But I can just tell you that this change will be at 3 levels. One will be at a mindset level, right? And which will typically be at a leadership level to start with. The second would be at a communication level. Like, is this getting communicated enough through the organization? Whatever the agenda has been set and so on and so forth, is this getting communicated enough? And I think third is the systems and processes at the final mile, right? And by systems and processes, I just don't mean how work is getting done, but how relationships are getting created, or how the manager and supervisor, or manager and employee relationship is driven. Can you have those trust-based conversations? Is there a genuine feeling of inclusion, and so on and so forth? So I think it will be at those 3 levels, but it will differ, I think, from organization to organization a bit. If that answered your question a bit, or your point of view, Clifton. But thanks for that. Thank you. All right. Anybody else who wanted to respond to maybe Clifton, or has a different point of view or a question? Anybody, any organization? Yeah, sorry, go ahead. Somebody was trying to speak.
No, Sekat, I think I was just saying that what Cliff was saying was right from the context of top down. And that's why, when I was giving the example of the emails, it's very much that when it comes from the management, when the management team has it as an open door policy, the culture, everything comes in only when it is come from the top. So that does help. And what I believe is the important part of this is first learn to accept, if whatever it is, even if it's a situation of losing a loved one, I think any type of mental health issue that creates after losing a loved one, as I think when Preeti was mentioning it, it's sadness. It's fine. And it's fine to accept it that you're sad. So just first step for anything or any issue would be to accept. And then comes everything that we spoke about, and adapt is what. So it goes like accept and then adapt. So that's, if we follow that in a general lifestyle, I believe that's how it will work. So that's about it.
That's well put. And in fact, I know Nilesh has put some points on the chat, and I think one of the key things that he's mentioning is also acceptance, right? No, thank you, Nilesh, for that comments. I think very, very practical also, I think. Fantastic. Anybody else with any thoughts, any, yeah, Charu, yes, I think you have your hand up.
I was just thinking, one of the things, if you would be having this data about like the exit interviews, definitely, and how much people do share on that, and how that is then related to the reasons for especially people leaving. But also there are things that people don't put in a formal exit interview, but of course their manager, their skip level manager might know and informally might be told. But if there are ways to capture that, and then correlate that with, you know, the number of resignations, and, you know, if there's a pattern in so many industries, we see burnout, and it's just recognized, like, you know, this is, people leave after about a year, people leave a year and 1 year and 1.5 years, and it's accepted that this is the burnout rate and people are burnt out. But if that data can be correlated, and you know, there is significant costs, of course, to training new employees rather than retaining the ones that you already have. And I think, I mean, there are obviously the rights-based approach, and I think that is definitely the more powerful and the more, I mean, I think that's the right way to go about it. But for some other people, perhaps the costs is also a factor that might help them to shift some of their mindset. And I think the other part of this is really, like, in the communication, really outlining the behaviors through storytelling about, you know, what kinds of behaviors are fine and what are not fine, so that people really begin to recognize, and those are you know, then very accepted and understood, that, you know, if an aberration occurs, people can recognize it very easily. So that's the second thing. And I think the third thing would really be, and I think people already spoke about some of that, like training for HR, but also training for managers in recognizing issues. And when people might be surfacing, I mean, might be having those issues, but might not be articulating or recognizing it themselves.
I think fabulous points, Charu. Completely, you know, in sync with you. I think the first one, I'm not sure how, you know, unless a company agrees to do that, you know, look at their exit interviews, things, and we, you know, we'll have to obviously figure out that how much of that is genuine and you know, really relatable. But yeah, I think that's a good analysis. In fact, at one point we had done a perception survey in terms of asking existing employees how likely are they to stick on to this job, right? And or how proud do they feel about, you know, the work that they're doing. So, and those numbers were not very encouraging, essentially. And this was in the other work that we had done. And that can actually give you a sense of how many people are wanting to leave as soon as they get an opportunity, right? Yes, but getting, you know, into that aspect as to, you know, what led to those, you know, exits is something that will be very valuable, I think. Yeah. No, awesome. Thank you.
If I may just add one point here, is that there is a clear link between well-being and attrition. So at least I've seen that in organizations where we've run this kind of a survey. I've actually been able to predict that the attrition of this department will be very high, this location will be very high, just basis the well-being data. So there is a very clear link between well-being and attrition, which I think Charu pointed out.
Thank you, Amsaz. Yeah. Krish, any thoughts? Anybody else? Anything from the sports arena? Does mental well-being play a role there as well?
Yeah, thank you, Shaikat. I think thank you everyone for this thing, bringing it together. Yeah, definitely. I think sports has a different perspective in itself. You know, I've always worked in the field of sports. So for us as a sports psychologist, I think it's a different perspective altogether. And what, you know, we can relate exactly. In fact, a lot of corporates in this part of the world, in fact, Clifton can agree with me, in Germany and in Scandinavia, we are using a lot of sports psychologists in the mainstream corporate platform. just to bring that perspective of kind of an athlete, like we are treating an employee as an athlete, and the role, the leadership role, because leadership, what we learn out of sports is something which is being trying to, kind of replicated in the corporate platform too. And in fact, they're using sports as a massive platform in itself in the different corporate setup for, encouraging, remedies or kind of, solutions to any mental health issues at all, But I also agree to Marz what he started in his initial space, that recognizing the mental health thing in this part of the world is always a challenge. So that's why there's a lot of employee engagement programs, if you may call it. And I was listening to also Preeti, some of the stuff which she mentioned is very relevant in our field. And so I think this is a journey, as you rightly said, Shoykot, and if we as a team we can play a massive role. And mental well-being is definitely something which is high in the agenda for many corporates at the moment. And since you mentioned sports, I think they're using a lot of sports interactions. And I think the key word over here, what I see is a huge hashtag. Again, someone in Europe would follow it, is let's talk. So I think if we all talk and discuss this and not keep it within us, that's very important for us. I think if we can keep our conversations going, definitely this will be a relevant moving forward. But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
No, wonderful, wonderful. I'm also a bit cognizant of time. I know we had said 1 hour. This is an open conversation, and so just keeping that space. But I also understand Zoom fatigue is a real thing, and causes of maybe localized stress. But so I don't want to be, or we don't want to be responsible for it. But anybody wants to have anything else to share to as we close things off, that'll be wonderful. But otherwise, I think just so good to have all of you here and share your perspectives on this very important topic. And I like all of us are saying that it's very important that we keep the conversation going on this. We just don't know enough, except for some of the experts who are on this call. I don't think we know enough about this. I think we will have to figure out a way to bridge the management and the science of it with people who are really experts. And I think I just think that that's probably the way to take it to the masses. Otherwise it's going to be a little difficult. But really appreciate everybody here, and a special thanks from our team to, of course, Shruti, who really had a huge role to play in just building this entire thing up. But also Aneri, I don't know if she's there on the call, but she was the brains behind all the analytics that happened behind with all this data. So that's amazing. And then really want to call out Dave for all the effort that he took to actually publish this report, because he's doing 100 other things, and then he had to create this report, which was fairly technical in nature, very new terms for a lot of us, and then putting together this event. So thanks a lot, really appreciate, and absolutely appreciate Preeti for your time, all the panelists, really thankful, and this was all short notice, so thank you for making the time and coming for this, and sharing your perspectives. Everybody else, Clifton, Krish, everybody, Nilesh, everybody else that I can see on the call, thank you so much.
Our pleasure, Shoykot, and thank you to you also for hosting it in a beautiful way. And definitely, and one last thank Preeti also, because I've been checking your website while we are talking. So thank you so much for putting those resources on it. This is something Marz and myself will take in Norway for sure to some of the people. But thank you so much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, and congrats to the team.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Have a great evening. Bye-bye.